Good day everyone, lovely summer day here, winter day here, but it's quite sunny outside. And today we're gonna do a preventative maintenance operation on the Kia. Namely, we're going to change the drive belt, the tensioner and all the idlers. The components I'm gonna work with today are a Gates belt. I chose Gates because, as I'll be showing you later, the belt that's already on the car, the old one, is also Gates. And I went with the tensioner and the idlers from INA and SKF, which are two good brands that manufacture bearings and rollers and such. And I will be showing each and every one of these components as we replace the old ones. Just for reference, the drive belt on various occasions is also called the Pulley V belt or the serpentine belt or the accessory belt. All of these names are interchangeable. And let's see what the manual says about the drive belt. So we're at the normal maintenance schedule, diesel engine for Europe. And starting with 60,000 kilometers, it says inspect drive belt. First 90,000 kilometers and afterwards every 30,000 kilometers or 24 months. So they're asking us to verify it at 60,000, 90,000, 120, and so on. They never actually really specify a time when you're supposed to change it. They just say that you inspect it, and if anything needs changing, then you replace whatever needs replacing. In our case, I have already checked the state of the belt and the idlers, and they are a bit worn. I'll show you that later in detail. So I figured it's a good time to do the operation right now. And at the time of filming, the car is about 8 years old, and it's done 154 to 100 kilometers. Right, with that said, let's get to work. And we start by taking the front right wheel off here. For extra space, if you want, you can also turn the steering wheel all the way to the right, because the area we're going to be working on is around here. And we're gonna start by removing this cover, this bit, removing it, putting it to one side, and then removing this cover in order to access the belt and all the pulleys. And for the wheel cover, we have one metal screw with a Phillips head and two plastic clips also with Phillips heads. Here is one, and up here is the second one, and there's also a third one here. We don't actually need to remove more than these, because, as I said, this cover just needs to be disconnected and put to one side. We don't need to physically remove it all the way from the car. And after removing all the fasteners, just grab the cover, pull it towards the back and then towards the interior, and it just comes out, at which point it can be twisted. It doesn't tear off. And you just put it to one side behind the brakes, like this. And the cover is held in place at the top with 1, 2, 3 10mm bolts, which we need to remove. And after removing the 3 little bolts, by the way, make sure not to lose them, this cover can just be grabbed and pulled out with ease to reveal our area of interest. Let's do an inspection just like the one the manual asks for every 30,000 kilometers. So first, let us identify the components. This one here is the crankshaft pulley, which provides power to the belt and through the belt to all the other accessories. This is the air compressor and the air compressor pulley, and off topic, this is the air compressor clutch. And from the top, this is idler number 1. This down here is idler number 2. The wheel further down, this one here, is from the alternator. This one here, hopefully you can see it, is the idler from the tensioner. There is a third idler, which is this one here. And finally, the last is the water pump pulley all the way to the back. Cool. Let's remove the belt and check them in detail. But before we actually remove the belt, it's a really good idea to write the schematic on paper of all the pulleys and how the belt goes around them. Because the worst thing we can do is take the belt out and then not remember how to put it back in. So our view is from the top, just as we're sitting here looking down. And we have idler pulley, idler pulley, idler pulley, alternator pulley, tensioner pulley, water pump pulley, crankshaft pulley, and air conditioning compressor pulley. This is our schematic, and with this in mind, we can take the belt out. To actually take the belt out, you need a long and thin 17mm hex wrench, like the one I have here, which you put on the bolt that holds the idler pulley on the tensioner, and then you're supposed to pull on it towards the back of the car, and notice that as I do that, the belt slackens. And then while with one hand you slacken the tensioner, with the other hand at some point you can actually pull the belt off the pulleys. And once you've removed the belt from one of the pulley, the entire setup slackens, and you can gently take off the belt from all the other pulleys. Don't pull on it too hard. And eventually you're able to remove it out of the car. And with the belt out, let's take a look on its labels. So the original belt is also made by Gates, which is why, as I explained, I also bought Gates. And it is a 6PK2411 belt made out of Epdm and in China. So what does this mean? PK means automotive belt, 6 means it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 V-shaped grooves, and 2411 is its length in millimeters. So this belt, when it was new at least, had 2411 millimeters. Now what about Epdm? Epdm is the material out of which the belt is made. Now it used to be the case, on older cars at least, that the accessory belts were made from neoprene, and neoprene had a bit shorter life than Epdm, but more importantly, you can tell much easier when the belt was due changing, because on older neoprene belts, they would start to crack and you would start to lose bits of the grooves, which was a clear visual indicator that the belt needs replacing. Epdm belts have a longer life, however, they don't wear out in the same pattern as the neoprene belts. And what I mean by that is, even though this belt is 154,000 kilometers and 8 years old, you see it has no cracks, it has no missing pieces. So how do we know that it actually needs replacing? Well, let me show you. Here's a comparison with the new belt, and what do we notice? The actual thickness of the grooves is nearly twice as big on the new belt than it is on the old one, at least visually. So the way the Epdm belts wear out is they actually wear out similar to tires, right? In the sense that the rubber just gets eaten away slowly to the point where the grooves are so thin that the belt digs into the pulleys and the amount of friction between the belt and the pulleys drops below a certain minimum, at which point the belt can actually start to slip on the pulleys. And that will generate friction, which will generate heat, which will immediately increase the wear on the pulleys as well as on the belt. And then at some point the belt actually snaps from the heat and wear. So we are certain at this point that the belt at least needed replacing, which I already knew because I did the checkup a couple of days ago, but I also wanted to show this in the video. And with the belt checked, let's take a look at the pulleys. Now with pulleys, there are multiple different wear patterns. One possibility is for a pulley to spin very easily when you turn it by hand, like this one does. When a pulley spins way too freely, it means that the grease that was inside the bearing that allows the pulley to rotate has worn off or has gotten out of the bearing, and subsequently the spinning resistance has dropped. But at the same time, the wear of the bearing is going to increase much faster. It may or may not make a noise. In the case of this one, hopefully you heard that it is also making a bit of noise. Also, you can check the side-to-side play, and you definitely hear some noise there. Now, side-to-side play, even on new bearings, is normal as long as it is very small. It is actually designed to be in there at the beginning to allow the belt to sit on them properly. But once it gets too large, it may actually throw the belt off at some point. This one has, let's say, medium side-to-side play, so it still had a bit more life in it, but again, preventative maintenance means we're going to replace it. Another wear pattern is when, again, the grease is worn off, but the bearing is very hard to turn or irregular to turn, which obviously imposes additional tension on the belt and may also end up tearing it. We don't have that one in this case, but I just mentioned it for the sake of the video. Cool. So this one needs changing, and by extension there's really no point to just change one if you know that one is worn off, because there's a high probability that all the other idlers in the system are also worn to the point where they need replacing. Let's check the second idler down here. This one seems a bit better in the sense that you see that it stops spinning a bit faster, and side-to-side play. The side-to-side play on this one is actually fairly decent, so this one had a bit more life left in it. And then there's the third one here, which appears to stop quite rapidly after I spin it. So this one, most likely, if I had left it in the car at some point, it would have become very difficult to turn. And I actually checked these with a small stethoscope, which is a rather risky operation because you have to check them while the engine is running, and you don't want the stethoscope to touch anything that is spinning. But in any case, I definitely heard some loud grinding noise from this idler over here. So this one needs changing as well. And last one on the list is the idler pulley on the tensioner, which is the one down here, which also seems to stop a bit faster than normal. And this one also has absolutely no play side to side. So this also still had life left in him. But as I explained, preventative maintenance means we're gonna change all of them. Now this is also a good opportunity to check the state of all the other pulleys, like the alternator. Obviously this one will spin with a bit more difficulty, that's normal. The water pulley, just check for weird noises or anything, and the air compression pulley, which is down there. At this point, if the idlers and everything else look alright, you would normally proceed to put the belt back using the schematic that we wrote on paper, and that should be it. In our case, we will continue with the removal of the old components and the installation of the new ones. Starting with the topmost idler, it needs a 8 or ideally a 9mm Allen. I had either an 8 or a 10. A 10 wouldn't fit, and the 8 fits, albeit a bit loosely. And I couldn't get my ratchet in because of this air conditioning pipe, which is metal, and you can't really move it around. So I had to improvise. I used the curved Allen plus an extension to slacken the bolt, and then the bolt just comes out with relative ease. And with the old pulley removed, let us compare it with the new one. In terms of size, width, diameter, bolt size, etc., they are identical. This one is from SKF. Now normally I wanted to buy an INA one as well, but apparently for this particular pulley the supplier did not have the INA version, so I had to go with SKF. Let's see if you can hear the noise this one makes. There is definitely some noise, and as I said, see that it spins fairly freely. Also, the side-to-side motion is pretty audible. Okay. And compare that with the new one, which spins smoothly but stops earlier, and also the side-to-side play is much smaller. As I said, a little bit of side-to-side play is normal on new bearings for this kind of application. Cool, let's go and install this. The pulley can actually be installed by hand. The bolt can be twisted by hand nearly all the way to the final sitting position, and then I will tighten it with the Allen. Now the tightening torque for the bolts for all the idlers is given in the manual between 54 and about 64 Newton meters. And I'm gonna choose about 58, 59 Newton meters. For this particular idler, however, because of the restricted space, you may not be able to put a torque wrench and all the necessary bits to actually tighten that bolt, in which case you just use your Allen and some extension on top to make the arm longer, and just twist it to the original position that you found it when you removed the old pulley. So just take note before removing the old pulley of at what angle the curved Allen fits in, and then when you tighten back, just tighten to that angle, give or take, obviously. In my case, however, I'm actually going to try to torque it to spec using my medium-sized torque wrench, a crowfoot extension, and a 8mm Allen bit like so. The fact that the extension is perpendicular to the axis of the torque wrench should give me sufficient room to not be bothered by that air conditioning pipe. And I'm going to keep the torque value because the distance between the marker and the head of the torque wrench is approximately similar to the distance between the marker and the center of the bit. And this solution actually fits rather easily near the air conditioning pipe, so we torque it as explained. And that's it. Moving on to the second idler, the one you see down there, it has a normal 14mm hex bolt, which I have already slackened a bit, and with a thin wrench or a ratchet, remove the bolt and take the pulley out. Okay, I took the pulley out. It took a while because the bolt is pretty long, So again, let's compare the old one with the new one. Okay, size wise they are identical, the bolts have the same dimensions, their diameter is the same, and let's see what's the status of the bearing. Okay, it has medium play side to side, it is noticeable, and more importantly, it's making noise and it seems to stop pretty fast. Comparing with the new one that has very little side play and seems to spin a bit longer. Right, let's go and install the new idler. Just as before, start screwing the bolt in by hand to avoid any risks of cross-threading. And once you're satisfied that it's in place, as it is right now, grab a wrench or a ratchet and continue tightening it all the way. And don't forget to torque it properly. There is a bit more space than we had with the first idler, but still not too much, so again I'm using a crowfoot extension, like so. Now the third idler is, I think, the one that's the most difficult to get to. It's down there, also held in place with a 14mm bolt, and as before you need a thin wrench or ratchet to access it, but it can be done. I did say this is the most difficult one, right? Well, it is, because apart from the fact that I struggled to actually take the bolt out, try as I might, I couldn't really find a way to remove it from down there and take it out on its own. So that's fun. The only way that I see for this problem, besides disconnecting the engine from the engine mount, because I don't want to do that, I'm trying to avoid the removal of the engine mounts, is for me to also remove the tensioner and the idler, and that should make room between the second idler and the crankshaft pulley for the third idler to fall down as well. So let's see if I'm right. And at least the tensioner is making my life easy, because to remove it, all I need to do is go to the bottom of the car, and there is this 14mm bolt from here, and I've slackened it off. Awesome. And here's the tensioner out with a very easy removal. And here's the stubborn third idler out through the room made from the top to the bottom by the removal of the tensioner. And obviously, because of this restriction, we have to install the new idler first before installing the new tensioner. But first, let's do the customary comparison with the new part. Here is the old one. It has no side-to-side play, which is a bit worrying, and it's spinning quite a lot, and it's also making a little bit of noise. Here is the new one with very little play, and obviously it takes less time for it to stop spinning. Cool. Now let me see how I'm going to install this thing. And I actually took out the endoscope to see exactly where I need to get because of the lack of space. So here is the water pump pulley, down there is the crankshaft pulley, and over here is where we need to screw in the new idler. So pretty much right on top of the crankshaft pulley, give or take. And I needed to actually go by feel. You can stick your left hand on this side and your right hand on this one, and with care and patience you can actually feel where the installation location is, and then you just try with patience until the new bolt starts going in. Obviously, you need to screw it in by hand at the beginning, and after you're absolutely certain that it is placed properly and it won't fall, you can switch to your ratchets or wrenches or whatnot. And after tightening, this is the only way that I was able to actually torque it, with the torque wrench and the crow's foot connector, just as before. Like so. Moving on to the tensioner. Here is the old unit. The bearing on this unit is still in pretty good shape, so very little side-to-side motion, and the spinning is as it should be. So not too fast, not too slow, and it's not making any noise. But as I explained, it makes sense to replace it as preventative maintenance. And here is the new component. Also in very good shape. It also has this pin to keep it in tension until we install the belt, so we will not be removing this pin until the very end. And let me draw your attention to something really interesting. Remember how I said that I bought parts from INA and SKF? Well, guess what it says here at the top? It says Gates right over there. So this business of spare parts is really interesting, right? You buy an INA product, you get a Gates, and some of the times you may buy a Gates product and get an INA. Good thing Gates is also a very good brand, so I'm not worried at all about quality, but you know, just a little bit of ranting. And the installation is straightforward and easy. Just make sure that this protrusion, this little pin, matches with this position here. And just as before, start by tightening by hand and then switch to a ratchet towards the end and tighten to the same torque just as all the other bolts. I have tightened the tensioner, which means that at this point we're done with all the idlers and pulleys and so on. The last thing to do is to install the new belt. And as I said, I'm using a Gates belt, just like the old one. Just one very quick mention, the old one was 6PK2411. This one is a 6PK2413. But the extra 2 millimeters will not cause a problem because they will be taken up by the tensioner. This is actually on the OEM code for the drive belt for this car. So we know the product will fit and it is what we need it to be. Alright, now we're gonna go get our written schematic with the path of the belt, and we are going to install the belt according to our drawing. Again, do keep in mind, do not remove this little pin until the belt is in position. And here is the belt installed. I've spent a good amount of time routing it correctly and also making sure that the belt sits correctly on each individual pulley and that it doesn't drop out or fall too much on one side on the tensioner pulley, this idler and that idler. And before I go back to the tensioner, here's one interesting observation. Remember how the original belt was made in China? Well, this one, it actually says right over there, made in EU, this one, so that is a nice touch. Anyways, let's enable the tensioner now. And here we are. I've put the 17mm spanner on the tensioner pulley bolt so that when I remove the pin, it doesn't just jump on the belt and shock it, but I can pick up the tension in the ratchet and then apply it gently. So here it goes. That's the pin out. And here is the tension applied. Awesome. Here is the tensioned belt, seating properly according to the schematic. which means now is the moment of truth. I'm gonna start the car and see how it behaves. And here it is working. No squeaks, no noises, no problem. Absolutely awesome. I put the belt cover back on, tightening the 3 10mm screws at the top, just as I showed you at the beginning. And now let's put this cover back on with care. And a lot of dust, apparently. And you just have to jiggle it into position. The cover has to come behind this plastic bar, like so. Anyway, bolts back in, 1 clip, 2 clips, and 3 clips back in. The last thing to do is install the wheel and tighten the lug nuts to 102 Newton meters. And it's conclusion time. The first thing I want to talk about is the method used for changing the belt and the pulleys. Now, as I've explained, I chose a method where I didn't have to remove the engine mount in order to change all the components, which saved me work on jacking up the engine, removing and installing the engine mount as such. But it was a bit more difficult with regards to accessing especially the third pulley, and the struggle for space can actually become a bit annoying at times. Never mind the fact that you need somewhat thinner tools to access the bolts that hold the pulleys in. But as you've seen, it can be done. Now, if you don't want to do this, obviously you have the second method where you jack up the engine, you remove the engine mount, which sits above the belt, and that should give you presumably a bit more space to work. So the actual changing method is purely up to you. Each one has its plus and its minuses. The second topic is obviously cost. All of these components that you see here, which are made by very good brands known for bearings, belts and so on, Gates, INA, SKF and such, cost me about 130 euros. Let's round up a bit more, say 150, because technically there's also the hidden cost of the tools, which I had to buy a while ago and which I've used for this operation, compared to a quote that I got from a Kia dealer for exactly the same operation, which was for 300 euros. So just as with all my other videos, more or less when you do the work yourself, you halve the cost of the operation. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. Please consider subscribing if you enjoy my videos. Have a lovely day, and I will catch you next time. Bye!